Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this time, I wanted to talk to you about the Saturn Uranus sextile that took place on August 11th, and which will be followed by the Uranus Neptune sextile, taking place on August 28th. Now, these are very significant planetary aspects, transits that are taking place, because these aspects are taking place among the slower moving planets. Until the discovery of the modern planets in 1781, the slowest moving planet in astrology was Saturn. Saturn took 28 to 30 years to go through all 12 signs of the zodiac. After 1781, with the discovery of Uranus in 1781, followed by Neptune in 1846 and Pluto in 1930, the modern planets sort of took more precedence in terms of the slower moving planets, meaning that slower moving planets, the longer it takes a planet to move through just one zodiac sign, means the longer the influence, the more powerful the influence of that planet. For instance, Mercury will just take a few weeks to move through an astrological sign. And so the influence of Mercury in that particular sign can be felt very speedily and very quickly. But when you have a planet like, for instance, Pluto moving through a zodiac sign, because Pluto takes so long to move through one sign, it can be anywhere from 12 to 32 years, the influence of Pluto is very long-standing and has a more influential effect on us down here below. Kind of a good way to think of the difference between the traditional planets, which were Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, versus the modern planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, is that the traditional planets were kind of seen as eventful, taking place in your typical regular day-to-day life, and the modern planets were sort of seen as currents. Okay, so you can almost see the modern planets as the current that carries the events that take place in our life. And that's because the modern planets take such a long time and their influence is felt for such a long time while they're traveling through a particular zodiac sign. Now, when we're dealing with a planet like Saturn, and we're also dealing with Uranus and Neptune in these two sextiles that are going to be taking place in the month of August, these are not really easy planets to work with in an astrological chart. And what do I mean by easy? Well, it's not like the sun, which is really kind of about your identity and your personality and who you are. And it's not like the moon, which rules over your emotions and your feelings. And so shift and change according to the phase of the moon in the sky, literally in astrology. So moon has a more personal kind of flavor to it. Saturn is a planet that deals with tests, trials, and tribulations. Uranus is a planet that deals with revolution and change. And Neptune is the planet of illusion and disillusionment. So if we take a moment and sort of think about what I just described, it's like, oh, we've got a planet dealing with test trials and tribulations, all right. And then there's a planet dealing with revolution and change, sudden and unexpected upsets. And then there's a planet of illusion and disillusionment. One might begin to wonder, well, what about these particular transits are supposed to be positive? I mean, what about these particular planets are supposed to be constructive in my life? It's like tests and trials and revolution and change and illusion and disillusionment. Show me to the nearest bunker so I can, hide out until the effects and the influences of these planets pass. Well, that's not really how astrology works. I mean, astrology, yes, it tells us about planets entering into signs and the impact and the influence that the planets are going to have in those signs, but we still have to live in this world. We are still living in conjunction with the planets and their movements in the sky. You can't really hide out. You can't really escape, no more than you could escape from air or water or earth or heat. All right. These are planetary factors. These are planetary influences that take place in your life. So, what we look to do is sort of see what we can do to work with these energies in our lives. And this is the wonderful gift that astrology gives us. Just like a weather report can tell us about approaching weather, astrology can tell us about the approaching transits and alignments of the planets in the zodiac signs and what to expect, and maybe even how we can direct and redirect some of those energies that are going to be coursing through our horoscopes. Now, something that these three planets have in common is that they are traveling through air and fire signs. Certainly, when you add Pluto and Aquarius to the mix, you get this combination of air and fire, which is taking place in the heavens above. Saturn and Neptune are currently traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries, which is a fire sign. Uranus is in Gemini, which is an air sign, and Pluto, which we're not really going to be talking about today, Pluto is in Aquarius, which is an air sign. The fact that the modern planets that take so long to travel just through one zodiac sign, combined with Saturn, which is already a slow-moving planet, the fact that they are moving through air and fire signs tells us really about the climate that we're living in right now. Up until this year, many of these planets were traveling through earth and water signs, okay? And earth and water, in terms of its temperament, is very different from fire and air. So, with these planets moving through fire and air elements, what can we expect? Well, we have four elements in astrology: water, earth, air, and fire. Water and earth were called the feminine or the yin elements, and air and fire were called the masculine or the yang elements. Okay, and it was this idea that fire and air was active and activating. And so the air and fire elements together in masculine or yang energies, what these bring out are the qualities that are very remarkable about air, which is sort of cerebral in terms of its nature. Air is very communicative, it's very cerebral, very intellectual, up in its head a lot. And fire by its nature is very sensational. Okay, and what I mean by sensational, well, we can just sort of look at what's the latest sensation. I mean, the sensation is kind of like, wow, how exciting. Okay, that can be sensational. But what you have with fire element and the fire signs, which are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, is that it's really drawn to excitement. What's something that makes you feel passionate, excited, exhilarated, thrilled? Okay, these are sensational experiences, which are different from emotional experiences. Emotions can be angry, and they certainly can sort of be excited, but they can also be loving or depressed or reflective or quiet or withdrawn or generous and good humored. Sensation is about peak experiences. So it's peak exhilaration, it's peak excitement, it's peak passion. And fire signs want to remain at that peak. Okay, they don't want the flame to dwindle. They don't want the excitement to lower. Okay, so here you have fire, which is very much about sensational or peak experiences, like that was the best game ever, or I've never been in love like this, or you're the most fabulous person I've ever met. Okay, with fire signs, everything is bold caps and in exclamation points. It's the peak experience. And then air, we talk about air as being cerebral, maybe in its head, and there can be a sort of distance or detachment to air. Okay, what they both have in common, air and fire, is aloft. It's the idea of something being aloft or risen up. I think a really good example of fire and air is like a hot air balloon. Okay, you turn up the flame in the balloon and the gas fills the balloon and it lifts the balloon and the people who are in the gondola aloft. They're lifted up. And so this is something that fire and air is about. It's very uplifting and it's very high, not high, but like, oh, it got high today, but high as in aloft and very spiritual and seeing things from a bird's eye view. And again, the temperament tends to be more optimistic with these two elements. And so air, being a people-oriented element, and the air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, air wants people to get along, and fire, being connected to the signs that I already just described to you, which are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, fire wants people to be true to themselves. So these are kind of the two ideas to keep in mind, elementally speaking, with these upcoming sextiles. Air wants people to get along, and fire wants people to be true to themselves. But when we sort of take a closer look at this, I mean, it sounds wonderful, and it is going to be wonderful, very optimistic and very positive thinking. We also know that air has a tendency, because it's associated with the mind and the mental faculties, to be very nervous and very restless by nature. Air signs can have difficulty with turning off their mind. The mind is always going, or it's always thinking, or overthinking, or analyzing, or the mind is constantly curious, going from one curious subject or topic to another. It wants to gather things and it wants to stimulate the mind. The mind wants to think. It doesn't want to just turn off and be a daze or blank. The mind wants to think. It wants to calculate. It wants to strategize. It wants to analyze. So there can be a nervous and a restless and a roving nature to air. And then fire, as I said, can be sensational. It's about the exhilaration. It's about the passion. It's about the excitement. It's about the thrill of an experience. And as you can sort of maybe imagine from what I'm describing, both energies can be very 24/7. They can be very on 24/7. And unless it's directed or harnessed, these energies can be overwhelming in an astrological chart, and they can even lead to burnout. Air signs have a tendency to disassociate from the body. They're running on nervous energy. Think of, I don't know, maybe your college days when you were drinking coffee or Red Bull or whatever to keep your mind going so that you could absorb all of this information for your final exams. Okay, that can be very air, and then fire is always looking and searching and reaching, and living for the future. Fire, if it's very powerful in a chart, can be very dissatisfied with its present circumstances. It wants to be somewhere else, or it wants to be up higher, it wants to be further along. So fire is always oriented towards the future. So if you think of this idea of like the mind that's constantly being on and seeking new sensation, what would be a typical modern current example of, oh, I know. Okay, like a typical modern current example of this would be, think of the daily news cycle that we get on our phones and our TVs and computers and things like this. The daily news cycle, which is always like, breaking story or thing you need to know about, or so and so is in dire straits. So the daily news cycle has a tendency, if you get lost in it, to sort of take over. It's like, oh, what's going on with the Kardashians today, or what's going on with so and so, or what's going on with war or breakout or violence or something. It can get you hooked into this daily news cycle. And so when we think of the daily news cycle, the idea of new things that are are happening, on the world stage, new things that need to be analyzed, or new breaking stories that we need to get upset about. They can be stimulating for air and fire signs who want to discuss their ideas of this, or who want to express their colorful opinions about this. But for the water and earth signs, this can all be very exhausting.
Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Did you know that you could get my free weekly horoscopes sent directly to your inbox every week? Just go to www.astrologyhub.com/horoscope to sign up and start receiving yours today.
So what can we expect with the Saturn and Uranus sextile on August 11th? Saturn is the planet of test, trials, and tribulation, and Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. These two planets, by the way, happen to be the ruling planets of the zodiac sign of Aquarius, okay? Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. It was the ruler of Aquarius until the discovery of Uranus in 1781, which introduced the idea of a traditional and a modern planet co-ruling a zodiac sign. So here we've got Saturn, planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. It slows things down. It introduces obstacles in our path. It thwarts our progress. It withdraws something, or withdraws or withholds really something that we really, really want. So Saturn can be very exasperating, and Saturn can be very frustrating and even, agonizing. We want something, but it's being kept from us, and why? So Saturn tests in our pursuit of the things that we want. And Saturn tests by withholding it from us. If we say that we really want to do this, or we really want to do that, or we really want to achieve this, okay, Saturn keeps it from us and says, okay, how badly do you want it, is basically what it gets down to. And if we're like, oh, not that much, what an inconvenience, or this is too difficult, or this problem is too hard for me to grapple with, then Saturn says basically, well, I guess you maybe didn't want it that much, and so we're like, oh, like I already had a negative self-image, and now Saturn, you've made it even more negative. Saturn. All right. So Saturn does that. That's an experience that we can have of Saturn, and the experience that we can have of Uranus in our chart is that Uranus will upset our set expectations. We really plan for things to work out in this certain way, and Uranus, when it comes along, will kick over the game board and send all the pieces flying. And so we're like, oh my goodness, I had everything set up like this, and all of a sudden this thing came out of left field and knocked it all upside down. Well, that's Uranus's job. Now, Uranus doesn't sort of like speed past our horoscope and go, ha ha ha, is it like, sends, hits a puddle of water and sends it splashing into our face, or anything like that. Uranus doesn't upset something just to upset it. Uranus does it in order to revolutionize our lives, to shake us out of our complacency, to get us to look further than what our traditional or established expectations. Uranus says, you know what? The game doesn't have to be played this way. Who made up these rules anyway? You can throw over the rules. You can change the system. You can do something that's radically different. While everyone else is like, oh, this is unprecedented, or this has never been done before, or you can't do this. Uranus is like, why can't you do this? Why has it never been done before? It hasn't been done before because you've had people like Saturn telling you that those are the rules and laws and regulations, and that you can't do it. Well, I'm here Uranus, as the planet of revolution and change, to say, I can do it. You can kick over the traces. You can knock over the things that are set. You can be unprecedented on a regular day basis if you want to. That's the point. You don't have to be penned in. You don't have to accept what are established rules and laws and codes. So you can sort of see why Saturn and Uranus have an antagonistic relationship. Saturn is very much about the rules and the laws and the way that things have always been done. And Uranus is about why does it have to be done like that? And I'm kicking over the game board and I'm going to change it. Well, they go at one another. Saturn is like, well, if you kick over the game board, there's going to be consequences, of that. There's going to be hell to pay. And Uranus is like, don't infiltrate my mind with your negative propaganda. I've got to be free and let's see how things are going to be different. And basically the story of their relationship is kind of the story of Western civilization. But to bring it down to what we can expect in our lives now, what happens with a sextile, because that's the relationship that's being formed between Saturn and Uranus on August 11th, what happens to the sextile is that the sextile changes the way that these two planets relate to one another. Okay, sextile is an aspect in astrology, and aspects refer to relationships among the planets. There's conjunction, which is two planets on the same page. There's opposition, planets in opposite camps and they want nothing to do with one another. There's a square where two planets are wrestling with one another to get the upper hand. There's a trine where the two planets are like, oh, I love you. I love you too. I'll support you in whatever you do. You will. We'll all support you in whatever you do. The trines are unconditional support, sympathy, and understanding between the planets, and they're really lovely aspects. And then there's the sextile, which is positive like a trine is, but the two planets aren't completely in agreement. They have different ideas of how they want to approach. And so what they're going to do is engage in a conversation. They're going to talk about their points in common, they're going to talk about their differences, and they're going to talk about a way that they can work to one another's benefit. So sextiles are very conversational and they're very much aimed at mutual benefit. So when you have a sextile taking place between a planet like Saturn and a planet like Uranus, that means they're coming into conversation. Saturn is like, well, this is the way that things have always been done. And Uranus is like, why does it have to stay like that? How do we know it's the way it's always been done? Hasn't history been revised or written by the winners? That could have been done differently centuries ago. It could be done differently now. Let's do it differently moving forward. Why does it have to stay with the status quo? Okay, where before they were like, Uranus, Saturn. Okay, they're like, hmm. Saturn might be like, well, I mean, it doesn't have to stay that way, but there was a reason why it's that way. So, what do you think could change? And Uranus could be like, well, this could change and that could change. I mean, I'm not trying to like rain on your parade, Saturn. I'm just trying to get you to not be so stodgy and to maybe see alternatives or options or different ways of reworking something. And Saturn's like, hmm, maybe you have a point. And Uranus is like, and I also want to respect where you're coming from, Saturn, because you're bringing the history and the statistics and the lore and the things that have been gathered to prove these things. But that doesn't always make things set in stone. We can do a twist or whatever, and let's do that. So what happens with the sextile is that it brings out the best in both planets. Fire and air are the two masculine or yang elements, energies. And so when you have Saturn in Aries, which is a fire sign, and Uranus in Gemini, which is an air sign, there's a conversation that takes place. Air introduces options in a Gemini way. Gemini is already very conversational. Here are options and choices, and let's play with these things. And Aries can be like, okay, those are good options and choices, and we can play with these things, but I'm a fire cardinal sign, and we have to be going somewhere with it. Okay, we have to have a goal that we're going to accomplish here. It can't just be like playing with variables. We have to bring it together and achieve this goal. We have to accomplish this ends. And so they come together with that sort of like temperament. So when the sextile brings out the best in both planets on August 11th, but it's not exclusive to August 11th. It's actually running through the month because it's going to be picked up by the Uranus Neptune sextile, which is taking place between the same two signs. So what happens is that Saturn, instead of being full of doubt and foot dragging and poking holes in things, becomes convinced by Uranus's case of things don't have to stay the same. You can respect what's come before, but maybe work it in a new way, see it in a different light, change the perspective slightly, rework or revise, revisit. So Saturn goes from being doubtful and foot dragging to commitment and industry. These are the two things that Saturn can really bring when it is positively aspected. Commitment, which is I'm going to go the distance. Okay, Aries, I'm going to start with Saturn in Aries. The positive side to Saturn in Aries is easily, literally finishing what you start. Okay, so there's a commitment, and then there's industry. I'm going to figure out a way that this can work. I'm going to work on making it work in some way. I'm going to take what's theoretical and fashion it into something that is applicable. This is the beauty of Saturn, finding a way to apply it. Actually, Saturn and Mercury both have that in common. So what happens to Uranus when it's sextiled by Saturn, when it's moved by Saturn's case and argument and is truly listening to it and sees merit in it, which happens with the sextile? Uranus brings insight and invention instead of revolution and chaos. Okay. Revolution can be the overthrowing of something only to be overthrown, only to be overthrown, only to be overthrown again. Okay. It can be like a turning or a never-ending wheel, which is basically what revolution meant before it was applied to the idea of overthrowing like a government. It referred to the orbit of a planet around the sun. A planet completed one uh, orbit, or a planet completed one revolution around the sun. So it means going around. And so here, Uranus moves from revolution and change, which can just be sort of change for change's sake, to insight and invention. Okay, so instead of the revolution and chaos, Uranus brings insight and invention. Uh, oh, it just dawned on me on how we can use this or work this situation or rework this situation, and let's be inventive about it. Let's even be experimental. Let's see what would happen if we did this, and let's see what would happen if we did that. So these energies are brought to light through the sextile, and they move into your horoscope in terms of you rethinking problems or issues, you reworking a set formula in your life. Maybe it's a formula that keeps hitting a dead end over and over and over again, and you're exasperated and you want to give up. This sextile energy gives you that kind of like aha moment, or wait, I could change this, or what would happen if I changed this? It brings this inventiveness and this Gemini energy play into your horoscope so that you can start reconfiguring or playing or revisiting things and coming up with a different result, coming up with a different product. So this energy is really, it marks a perfect time to launch, I don't know, your most ambitious project, or to pursue your most impossible endeavor, and when you take into account that it's Saturn and Uranus together here, what you want is the more far-fetched, the better. The more like, what are you thinking? That's crazy, the better. Because what's really wonderful about Uranus in Gemini is that you can try something out and you can spin out and it can go, it can go south or whatever. But then you sort of like pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try something different. Okay, so there's a willingness to like try it, it didn't work out, let's try something else, and maybe that will work out, maybe it won't. That's a wonderful quality that Gemini has. Gemini isn't going to bet everything on one thing. It will try something and then try something else and then try something else. This is native to Gemini. This is what they do. And then what you also have here is the daringness of Aries, of the daringness of daring to go and do that. Now, Saturn in Aries can be a bit inhibiting, but I mean, it can be very inhibiting. It can even bring false starts or being blocked at every turn. But then there's a gumption, there's a drive to Aries that wants to power through or get through that obstacle. It's even though Saturn is in Aries and may be inhibiting the Aries energy, Saturn is still in Aries, and Aries is still about gumption and drive and powering through. And so, you can be fighting yourself with the Saturn in Aries, or you can sort of flip the Saturn and see it as more along the lines of taking on challenges and obstacles and then figuring out a way to get through them, figuring out a way to master them, which of course is what Saturn is all about. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Uranus Neptune sextile on August 28th. All right. We have Uranus in Gemini. Once again, we already talked a little bit about the effect of Uranus in Gemini, its effect on Saturn in Aries. And now we're going to be talking about Uranus and Gemini's effect on Neptune in Aries. Indeed, Saturn and Neptune are both traveling through the zodiac sign of Aries. So we know that Gemini is a very conversational sign. It's a very curious sign. It's a very playful sort of sign, very experimental. Uh, Gemini can be. And so we have Uranus, which also brings the invention and the innovation of the planet. The planet is associated with modern technology. And indeed, at the time of its discovery, it was the first planet to be discovered by a telescope and a very powerful telescope. And so it kind of becomes the planet of modern technology in that it emerges, because it's seen by a telescope. But more importantly, the period of time that Uranus emerges, which is 1781, which is the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. This was a very exciting technological time that was going on here. I mean, we often, will focus on things like the Declaration of Independence and the rights of man, as being fruits of the Enlightenment, the age of the Enlightenment, which is an age of discovery and the rise of science into the ascendancy. But that's the other thing that I want to point out here about what was going on in Europe and America in the West, and we're talking about Western astrology. So this is going to be of interest for astrologers practicing Western astrology in the West. Okay, what was going on here is a lot of technological innovations, a lot of tinkering. I think Louis the XVI was very fond of clocks and playing around with the mechanism of clocks and things like this. And so there was a lot of invention and there was the perfecting of the intellect that was going on around the period of time that Uranus was discovered. There was the harnessing of electricity that was also coincident with the discovery of Uranus. So this is why Uranus is associated to science and the scientist, to the Enlightenment, to technological revolutions. These are all things that are associated to Uranus. So Uranus will always represent modern technology as it's being practiced, investigated, and experienced in your own lifetime. So I thought that I would take a moment here to really talk about or even unpack Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries. Neptune we pretty much know as a mystical planet. Okay, it's the planet of illusion and disillusionment. Okay, Neptune is a planet that's very much associated to what we long for, what we yearn for, and Neptune glamorizes. And if you remember the Harry Potter books and films, uh, there was a spell of glamour where you glamorized through a spell. You made something appear more beautiful and lovely than and appealing than it really was. And so this is what Neptune does. It will make the zodiac sign that it's passing through more appealing. It glamorizes whatever zodiac sign it's passing through. And what happens, because Neptune is also a planet that's so associated to our culture, so associated to what we find appealing or what we even think is right. Remember that Neptune is named after the Roman god Neptune, who's associated to the Greek god Poseidon, the god of the seas. So the idea of living in a bubble is very Neptunian, and so you sort of like live in a bubble in this Neptune universe, all right? So Neptune will glamorize whatever zodiac sign it's passing through. And right now, Neptune is in the zodiac sign of Aries. And so Neptune is going to glamorize Aries. Well, what are the things that we know about Aries? It's the first sign of the zodiac. Okay. And the reason why it's the first sign of the zodiac is because Aries is connected to the spring equinox. It's the first zodiac sign of the agricultural year that begins with Aries and runs right through Libra, which marks the end of the agricultural year. And then things go dormant through the fall and the winter, only to come back to life again with the reappearance or the return of the sun to the spring equinox, the sign of the spring equinox, which is Aries. So Aries is really about life beginning and starting out. We know that Aries is ruled by Mars, the Roman god of war. And also Mars is very much associated to the male gender or the masculine sex. Nowadays, men and women can both be very Marsy. Okay, there isn't like only men are Mars and only women are Venus. It's very fluid. Okay, and anyone with strong Mars in their chart is going to exhibit those Marsy qualities. And so when you've got Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries, it's going to glamorize the call to arms. Okay, come and take arms against the enemy. There's an enemy out there that we have to fight. They're going to ruin our civilization or sack our town and run away with our livestock or something like that. So or there are these heretics who are trying to take over the world and bring bad things to it. So I'm calling you to arms and I'm calling you to fight the righteous fight. Okay, join me, brothers, sisters, comrades, and fight for what is right. So Neptune in Aries is going to glamorize this call to arms, this call to the barricades, as in Les Miserables, or a call to arms, as in the American War of Independence, or call to fight for freedom, World War II, whatever these call to arms are, Neptune in Aries is going to glamorize that. It's going to make people like, yes, yes, I want to answer the call to arms and take arms against whatever is threatening me or my home or my family or my society. Let's vanquish it, that evil thing. Okay, so this can be Neptune and Aries. It's one of the things that it glamorizes. Another thing that Aries glamorizes is rugged individualism. Okay, fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius will always celebrate the individual. Fire is the only element that celebrates individualism. Okay, and the fire signs believe that as an individual, make a difference in other people's lives. I make a difference in the way that something is going to turn out. I matter. I make a difference. And so the fire signs all take that very seriously about themselves. But with Aries and its rulership by Mars, there's a sort of rugged individualism. There's a kind of like, I've been through some battles and I've been through some struggles and I know what hard times are like. and my individualism has prevailed. I spoke out against authority and it had its boot on my throat, and I fought back. I'm true to who I am as a person. So a rugged individual, it's not someone who's like, I really want to be an authentic self one day. It's sort of like I am that authentic self, and I take the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune by being true to who I am, and I go where I please, and I do what I want, because I'm not bureaucratic, I'm not groupthink, I don't go and do what other people do. I'm true to who I am. So there's a kind of rugged individualism, and a big example of that is kind of like the myth of the cowboy in the United States of America. The cowboys are out there on the Western terrain, and they're herding cattle or something like this, and they're a law unto themselves. And that gets to the third part of the Neptune in Aries. Neptune in Aries glamorizes, mythologizes the person who answers only to themselves. I'm true to the spirit of freedom and independence, and I'm going to go against bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is some sort of made up machine. It robs people of their individuality, and bureaucracy is a whole bunch of featherweights who hide behind regulations and papers and things like that. And I'm a tough person, and I'm going to go on in, and I'm going to break up bureaucracy, and I'm going to liberate people who've been beholden to bureaucracy, and talk about action, taking action, making real action that has real impact in this world. Okay, so this is another thing that is going to be glamorized, mythologized by Neptune in Aries. And it's like, and I answer only to myself, and what that is that it's not a selfish thing. It's not like I answer only to myself because, I'm selfish. I answer only to myself because I'm in service to myself by being true to who I am and going up against anything that's fake or artificial or lethargic or apathetic. I'm full of passion and commitment and call to arms and raison, reason to be. I have this. This animates my life. This is a very spiritual experience. And so if I'm true to me, then I answer only to myself, and I, thumb the nose to kings and popes and dictators. And the reason I go kings and popes, for instance, is that's what the American colonies were absolutely dead set against: kings and popes, people who told other people what to think. And this comes out of the spirit of the Enlightenment itself. The rise of science had to overthrow religion, and science said, we're throwing off the chains of superstition, and we're going to be true to science, and we're going to enlighten or educate people. We're going to get rid of classes and stratas and things like that, and everyone is going to be free to be who they are to the extent that they can pursue it. That's where we get the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. It's like you're free to pursue those things. These were Enlightenment principles, and they're also principles that we can see embodied in the zodiac sign of Aries. Aries celebrates the self. And as I said earlier, all fire signs deal with self. But when I say Aries celebrates the self, what I'm really talking about is that the sun, by planetary dignity, is exalted in the zodiac sign of Aries. Okay, so the sun is most solar in the zodiac sign of Aries. The sun rules the zodiac sign of Leo. That's where it's at home. And Leo is the hottest time of year when you really feel the sun here in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay. But the exaltation, the celebration of the sun in Aries is like, huzzah, the sun has returned at the spring equinox and life is living again. Shoots are coming up through the ground, and trees are blooming, and there's this celebration of life. It's hard not to see celebration of life in the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere because things are flowering. And so this is the best that the sun can do. The sun doesn't burn or scorch like it can do in the summer. Okay. The things flower, they come to life, they're risen to life, and they bloom, and they fill the air with the perfume of their aromas. This happens in the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is why the sun is exalted, meaning most celebrated in the zodiac sign of Aries. And so these three Aries traits are going to be celebrated with Neptune in Aries, which is the self-made person, the self-reliant person, and the self-realized person. Self-made is I created this in my life. I didn't get a handout. I didn't get a silver spoon. Um, Maybe I came from the lowest of society and I didn't have any sort of chance in hell, and I made something of myself. So this is the Aries credo. It's like self-made. I didn't rely on anyone. I didn't depend on anyone. I didn't get a favor or a privilege. I am self-made. And then the next one, which is self-reliant. I don't depend on anyone. I don't rely on anyone. I'm self-reliant. I not only made my own fortune or what's good, but I am self-sufficient. I turn to myself. I rely on my own talents. I rely on my own resources. I rely on my own skills or my wit or my grit, or, I turn and rely on myself. This is also what Aries celebrates. And then the last one is self-realized, and self-realized is this like, wow, I worked really hard, or I was really inventive, or I was really skillful, or I followed a path that everyone said, what are you doing? This is crazy, and I got to the other side of it, and I got to a place of triumph, a place of victory, a place of celebration. And again, that came through my own effort. So these are the three sort of cardinal elements of Aries, which is self-made, self-reliant, self-realized. Aries sees itself as heroic. Okay, people born under Aries who have Aries rising or Aries moon are constantly running to the rescue of other people. Okay, so there's something very heroic about Aries. They will run to the rescue of someone who's in trouble. They won't turn their back on it. Where other people flee from a fire or disaster, that Mars energy rules over people who run towards it. They're going to help and they're going to defend, or they're going to protect, or they're going to save. They're not going to comment from far away or say, you go ahead and do that. I'm running in right after you. I'll be there along in a moment. They go and do what's right in the moment that's right for them to do it. And they don't do it with any sort of concern for their legacy or anything like that. They do it because it's the right thing to do. There's a sort of urgency. There's a not sort of urgency. There's an absolute urgency to these actions, to the heroic act. But if you look at Greek mythology, for instance, there's a downside to the hero. And indeed, heroes make a lot of mistakes, which can be disastrous for the people around them. For instance, here we have Hercules, who's known for his strength. And Hercules is the game changer, who comes on in if there's a problem or an obstacle or an enemy or something, and you might be outmatched, and we're looking at defeat, and Hercules comes in and he, moves the wall or smashes the boulder or takes on, the armies all by himself, and by the time he's done, they've been laid low. This was Hercules. But Hercules also had a horrible temper. And in fact, it was in one of his rages that he slaughters his wife and his children. It's a horrible tragedy. And it's the slaying of his wife and his children and the incredible shame that he has as a result of that, that leads to him doing the 12 labors of Hercules. He has to obey the orders of a king and in penance perform these 12 labors. That's why he goes and engages in the 12 labors of Hercules. But where everyone sort of, like worshiped Hercules' strength and his power, they also knew that it could turn dangerous, and it did. And he killed his wife and his family, which is one of the most heinous sins that you can commit in ancient Greece. And so there's that dark side to the hero. It's not the hero's like, I'm better than everyone else. It's like the hero has more power or has more skill or more talent than everyone else. The hero stands out. And this can be a good thing if it's harnessed positively, but it can be a disaster if it, for instance, in Hercules's case, goes into a rage. And then there's Achilles. Okay, remember from the Trojan War, there's Achilles' heel. His weakness was in his heel. And he ultimately dies when someone, Paris, goes and shoots an arrow in his heel, and that's the end of Achilles. But until then, Achilles is like a fighting machine, okay, in the Trojan War. I mean, the Trojans are like all sorts of frightened of Achilles, and the Greeks are like, I don't care how long this war takes, 10 months or 10 years, we're going to win as long as Achilles is on our side, and Achilles is a man's man, he slaughters, armies in one fell stroke of his sword, and he takes riches and women, which is what Trojan soldiers did, and all these sorts of things. And he's celebrated as a great hero. But there's an incident that takes place in which I think it's Agamemnon takes Achilles's woman. He had gotten a woman, and takes the woman either as his own lover or gives the woman to someone else, and Achilles is enraged. His woman, his prize has been taken away, and it was done in front of all the soldiers. And I think Agamemnon goes even further. He takes some of Achilles' riches and gives it to someone else. And he's doing it, I think, to discipline Achilles or something like that. And Achilles is furious. He's been humiliated in front of the other men. His some of his wealth and his woman has been taken away. And you don't take anything away from Achilles. He's a war machine. He's the reason you're fighting this. So Agamemnon basically disses him. He humiliates him in front of the other Greek armies. And so in reaction to this, Achilles does the most lethal thing that he could possibly do. Now, one would think, oh, he turns his anger at the armies and he lays them low and things like that. No, no, no. Achilles withdraws to his tent. And that's even a well-known phrase, which is like, come out of your tent. It's like when you're angry as a kid and you go to your room and you slam the door and you sulk, and everyone's like, okay, we all know, like you're angry and time for dinner and knock on the door and no answer. Well, Achilles goes to his tent and he withdraws to his tent in a real sulk, and he won't do anything to help the Greek armies. And so, and the Greek soldiers are like, Achilles, Achilles, come out and fight for us. The Trojans are anon. I don't know, the Trojans are attacking or something like that. And he won't, not for any reason. And the Trojans get wind of this and they're like, okay, they're losing. The Greeks don't have their MVP, their most valuable player here. So let's attack. And the Trojans do an enormous amount of damage, okay, because the other Greek soldiers aren't as good or as strong as Achilles, the great hero. And so by Achilles withdrawing himself from battle in the Trojan War, it results in a massacre of the Greek armies and the death of his best friend Patroclus. And so it's the withdrawal of Achilles that causes this great harm. And so that's kind of what I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about Mars energy and Neptune glamorizing the aspects of Mars. Um, there's the example of Hercules who lays low people in a fit of rage. And then there's the example of Achilles, who by withdrawing his presence creates disaster. So, as I said, fire is an element that celebrates the individual, and fire celebrates the individual who makes a difference, okay, in people's lives. And making a difference in people's lives, you can make a difference by showing up in people's lives, and you can make a difference by not showing up in people's lives. And so there's this idea that if you're, this heroic, fiery energy, you can't let people down if they're counting on you. So you have a responsibility, to them. You have to, be there for them because they're counting on you. But at the same time, if you're led by the applause meter of crowds, okay, what I mean by applause meter of crowds is people liking and applauding your efforts and things like that, you could wind up going down a very bad path. Um, by doing things so that you can win more huzzas or win more likes or things like that with the whimsy of crowds, you can wind up doing some very harmful things. So there's kind of a catch 22 here. There's a feeling of responsibility, but also not letting yourself get carried away with your talents or abilities or what you have. And this is something that Aries is really aware of. It kind of practices a stoicism with this, or what would be called like a soldierly conduct. So when we have Neptune in the zodiac sign of Aries, Neptune's going to ask you, what is your vision of yourself as an individual? How do you see yourself as an individual? Are you big? Are you a big individual? Are you big presence? Or are you small? Are you humble? Are you non-existent? Are you remarkable or are you unremarkable? And then where do you stand as an individual? Are you for? Are you against? And then Neptune in Aries is also going to ask, where do you stand? Are you for or are you against? Do you swing back and forth between the two opposing sides? Or do you abstain altogether from taking a stand? Neptune in Aries will always preach the Mars gospel of fighting fire with fire and powering through. Now, again, it sort of brings to mind, oh, is this going to be a very frightening time? Is it going to be like war and violence and havoc? Neptune mythologizing the elements of Aries that are connected to Mars, named after the god of war. Probably a truer way to really work with Mars or to name Mars is to say that it is a planet of struggle. Okay, we talk a lot about fight and combat and conflict with Mars, but it really is at its core a planet of struggle. And here, when we're thinking of like, assault or violence or things that are Marsy, let's also remember that nonviolence can be Mars. Okay. Nonviolence can be just as powerful as violence and perhaps even stronger. And an example of this would be Martin Luther King Jr.'s gospel of peace, his gospel of nonviolence. It took a lot of grit. It took a lot of strength. It took a lot of fortitude to walk those miles during the bus strike in Montgomery. It took a lot of grit, a lot of strength, a lot of fortitude to have things dumped on your head at a lunch counter to make a point that all people should be served at the lunch counter, or to have dogs sicked on you, or fire hoses sprayed, or police clubbing. It takes a lot of fortitude to change that current. And the example of nonviolence that Martin Luther King Jr. Personified, that he preached, that he put himself down on the line again and again and again. This can also be very Martian. This resistance, and also doing it in a non-violent way, which is much more difficult than doing it in a violent one. So, what are some ideas that we can sort of take from this? Okay, Neptune in Aries is going to celebrate the individual, the heroic individual. Does that mean that we're all going to be self-absorbed and full of ourselves or something like that? No, no, it's the hero, and that the hero can be noble, but the hero also has a dark side. The hero can be full of rage. The hero can be, I get to do what I want to do because I'm smarter than, stronger than, more resilient, more talented. Okay. But with that also comes a responsibility. So when we face things in the world, that can feel so overwhelming. It's like, what can I do to make a difference in Gaza or Ukraine or wherever? I feel so, passenger seat or thrown to one side, or like what I say or think doesn't even matter. The first thing we can do with these sensations is to accept that we don't have power over things that are larger or bigger than we are. Okay. We can't grow to that size to stop, an outrage or a war, or, we can't like become giant behemoths who are like, now I'm going to stride the world and end these conflicts and these. We can't do that. We're not capable of that. Many of us aren't even in those positions, and even the people in those positions, by the way, I don't think are doing such a great job at it either. Okay, so in essence, you kind of, and I think this is like a stoic belief, which is you accept that you don't have power over the things you don't have power over. They're larger than you, they're bigger than you, they're more institutionalized than you. They're going to go ahead and do what they're going to do. It's kind of like a done deal. Now, don't confuse this with an idea of resignation and powerlessness. When you accept that there is a power which you don't have power over, in fact, you can't meet them on their own turf in the struggle. What you do is that you then turn to yourself, all right, and you embrace the power of your own choice. We all have choices. They may be many choices, they may be few. There may be one good shot, or whatever situation you face, you have a choice in it. It doesn't mean that you're going to win or prevail, but you have a choice in how you want to deal with a situation in your life. And when you accept that you can't control someone else who is overpowering or overwhelming, instead of feeling like I'm out of control or I'm powerless, remember that you have a power of your choice. Okay. You can choose to do what you do in your life. Okay. It may be to resist, it might be joining the peace march. It might be joining a protest. It might be going door to door and knocking on doors. It might be reaching out to someone who's down on their luck. You can't save everyone who's down on their luck, but maybe you can work with one person who's down on their luck. Or maybe it's just smiling at them, or something along those lines. You have a choice and you have agency and you have an effect in the world that you live in. Each one of us has those things. For greater or for lesser, we have those things. And a lot of times what looks like a lesser hand can turn into a greater one. Again, look at someone like Martin Luther King Jr., all right? um, and then the third part is that with your action, okay, the power of your choice also gives you the power of action. When you act, when you take action, you also then become an example to other people through your actions. It's basically practicing what you preach, all right? We may think that the people who are of great influence are the ones on a pedestal or behind a podium or have a bazillion and a half followers on whatever. They may be of influence, but that doesn't necessarily make them a role model. Fire signs, and you see this a lot with Leo. Fire signs see themselves as role models. Leo, because it's ruled by the sun, takes this very seriously. That I am someone that everyone is looking at, and so I am a role model. I'm someone that people will look at and say, is there something about this person that's worth modeling myself after? And it's not because Leos are great or have beautiful hair and things like that. They are great and they do have beautiful hair, but what it is that they have a resolute presence in who they are, and that works for them. But what they're standing for is what works for you. stand in who you are and be a role model to others. So fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, they teach us the importance of being yourself, whatever that self may be. Okay. So a fire sign will teach you the importance of being yourself, but it's whatever yourself may be. You're not supposed to be like the fire sign. You might model yourselves after them in terms of like, oh, that's a very noble person. That's a very generous person. That's a very wise person. But your path to nobility, your path to generosity, your path to wisdom will be your own unique path. It won't be anyone else's path. So there's an importance in being yourself, whatever yourself may be. Now, you might have a self that's narcissistic. You might have a self that's self-sacrificing. You might have a self that's confused. You might have a self that's wise. Your life will reflect that self. That's the way that you will see it. And that's an important thing. Now, some of you might be like, what, are you giving narcissists permission to be narcissists? I'm not giving them permission to be a narcissist. Narcissists are going to be narcissists. That's who they are. Okay, like someone who's giving is going to be giving because that's who the person is. Someone may be giving and they may be surrounded by people who do nothing but take, 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 take. But it is that nature of that person to still be giving. And being giving doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be surrounded by people who are going to take. And being giving, if that's who you are, it's also the way that you're going to see the world. This is why the sun is so important in an astrological chart. It's the heart of the chart. It's the sun in the sign that describes to you what you know about yourself to be true. And there are at least 12 different versions of that sense of self. But also, what I would sort of throw out as an idea to you, we're all familiar with the phrase, um, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? And we're taught that this phrase is empathetic, that, if you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you're going to have sympathy for that person's position. You're going to see things through that person's point of view. You're going to understand that person, but you can't be empathetic. You can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes unless you have a self to put there. Okay. You're always carrying yourself around with you. And actually putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, which, produces empathy and hopes, it's done only because you have a self. And this is what's so important about fire is embracing who you are. All right. Now, the beauty of air, okay, remember these planets are moving through fire and air. The beauty of the air signs is that air signs are all about relationships to other people. Okay. There's me and there's you. Okay. And I might see aspects of myself in you, or you might see aspects of yourself in me, but we're still two different people, and so we can project, or we can recognize, or we can coordinate, or we can not talk to each other. But air signs is this idea that relationships, you can't escape relationship in the world, especially now, not nowadays, okay, where we really have to okay, but each person is joined to another person and no one is alone. Okay, so if each person is joined to another person, there's a kind of ecosystem of human relationship. Each of our actions are going to have an impact on somebody else's life, for good or for bad, whether we know about it or we don't know about it. And when you consider the power of that realization that my actions are going to have an impact on someone else and someone else's actions are going to have an impact on me, what that gets you to do as an individual is that it makes you conscious and it makes you conscientious. Okay, conscious is being aware, and then conscientious is being diligent about that awareness. Now that I know, I'm going to take these steps to do or maybe not to do. And what I wanted to share with you is that it's this awareness, it's this care that gives the Uranus Neptune sextile on August 28th both its relevance and its resonance.